Hi, welcome to our channel where we share the most intriguing stories. When a lone farmer receives a bizarre letter demanding half his profits from an HOA he's never belonged to, it sparks a battle that spirals into sabotage, forgery, and federal indictments. This isn't just a land dispute, it's war. And Randell McCormick doesn't lose on his own soil. I was standing in the orchard that morning, pruning back the peach trees, when I saw the envelope sticking out of the rusted mailbox at the edge of the gravel drive. It had the kind of texture that tells you it wasn't junk. White, thick stock, embossed return address. My stomach clenched before I even touched it. Red Timber Creek Homeowners Association. Now, that was funny. I live on 150 acres of private farmland that's been in my family since the early 80s, a good half-mile outside the nearest subdivision. My grandfather laid the property lines himself and had them locked into the county survey maps before I was even born. There's no HOA here. There never has been. Hell, my nearest neighbor's a full quarter-mile away, and the last person to try and tell us what to do with our land got chased off by a wild turkey and my late father with a shovel. Still, I opened the letter with the same gut-sinking dread I used to feel when the IRS dropped a new case on my desk. Old habits don't die easy. The letter was typed, formal, cold. Dear Mr. Randell McCormick, our records indicate that your agricultural operations may be in violation of Red Timber Creek HOA Article 12, A, concerning unauthorized commercial activity conducted within the extended perimeter of HOA managed lands. It went on, like that for 2 full pages. The part that made me bark out a laugh was near the bottom. To remedy the situation, the Board of Directors requires the retroactive payment of 50% of net profits generated from agricultural activity for the last fiscal year, along with immediate compliance to HOA landscaping and infrastructure regulations. I folded the letter neatly and set it down on the porch railing next to my coffee mug. I didn't speak for a full minute. I just stared out across the front pasture, where the soil had been tilled 2 weeks earlier and the green haze of winter kale was starting to peek through. Nothing had changed out there. No new roads, no new fences, no HOA flag planted in the dirt. I spent the next 2 hours going through the records. Survey maps, county registries, deed history, even the old correspondence between my grandfather and the original zoning office when Dry Hills Estate was established. The line between my land and Red Timber Creek had not moved an inch, not in 40 years. So I drafted a response, polite but firm. Attached were photocopies of the most current county records, plus the GPS-marked survey I had updated just last year. I even included a highlighted map showing the HOA boundary stopping 300 yards short of my southern hayfield. Then I overnighted it via certified mail and figured that would be the end of it. I was wrong. The next morning, I was ankle-deep in the chicken run replacing a busted water line when I heard tires crunching up my drive. A gray Mercedes SUV rolled to a stop right next to my workshop. 3 people got out. Leading the charge was a woman in a blood-red blazer, khakis too tight for her role, and the unmistakable gait of someone who had never worked a day in topsoil. She had a clipboard in one hand and a digital camera in the other. Mr. McCormick, she asked, as if my name wasn't stenciled on the mailbox and burned into the archway over the front gate. That's me, I replied, wiping my hands on a rag. She smiled with the tightness of a boa constrictor. Karen Godfrey, president of Red Timber Creek HOA. The other 2, younger and clearly less confident, stood behind her with the expression of interns sent into a war zone. I received your letter, she said, glancing at her clipboard like it was a legal summons. And I'm afraid you're misinformed. I raised an eyebrow. Misinformed? She nodded, as if I were a wayward child, and not a grown man who'd once investigated shell corporations for the U.S. Treasury. The HOA board voted last quarter to approve a perimeter expansion. Your property now partially falls within the extended maintenance and management boundary. We posted the revision on our community board. You should have received notice. Notice, I repeated deadpan. On a board I have no access to, in a community I don't live in. Karen took a step forward, holding up the camera, and clicked a few shots of the irrigation lines along my barn. This land now benefits from our services. Therefore, your commercial use of it is subject to community contribution, profit sharing, access rights, and aesthetic compliance. I stared at her. Are you trying to say that you people think you just annexed my farm? Karen's smile twitched. It's not annexation, it's integration. You are now a participant in our planned development overlay district. That includes dues and back assessments. That's when I laughed. Loud, long, and without a shred of politeness. One of the guys flinched. Karen didn't. I leaned on the fence and said calmly, "You can take your integration and stuff it back in that SUV. My land is not part of your little utopia. It never was. And if you or your people set foot past my property line again without an invite, I'll have you removed for trespassing." Karen didn't blink. "This isn't over, Mr. McCormick." "Damn right it's not," I said. "Next time, bring a lawyer." They left without another word, tires spinning a bit as they backed up. I watched the dust settle for a while. Then I went inside and opened a new file on my desktop. Karen Godfrey Ho threat. Evidence log number 1. Something told me I'd be needing it. 3 days later, I got a call from Joe Richards, retired surveyor, 73, grumpy as hell, and one of the only men I trusted in this county not to sell his soul to a city council brunch. He'd surveyed Dry Hills back when Reagan was president and kept more paper maps than the county clerk. I'd given him a heads up after the HOA's little field trip. "You got time to walk the southern line with me?" he asked, skipping pleasantries like usual. Something ain't sitting right. By that afternoon, we were trudging along the edge of the southern pasture, where my land butted up against an undeveloped slope of red clay and cedar. Joe held one of his yellowed plat maps like it was scripture. Every so often, he'd tap the GPS screen in his hand, grunt, and frown like the ground itself had lied to him. "There," he said finally. He pointed at a newly staked post just inside my fence line, not mine. The plastic flag fluttering on it read, RTC-E boundary, RTC Red Timber Creek. I crouched to examine the stake. It had been hammered in with a gas driver, probably at night, and the marking paint was still fresh. The kind of thing you only noticed if you knew every inch of your land. Which I did. "Someone's been busy," I muttered. "Too busy," Joe replied. "That's inside your deeded boundary by at least 15 yards. This ain't some measurement error. It's deliberate." It got worse. That evening, I drove into Stillwater and paid a visit to the Payne County Zoning Office. I'd been there dozens of times over the years, especially back in my IRS days when I chased fraudulent development permits and property tax fraud. I asked for any new filings in the last 60 days related to Red Timber Creek or any subdivision expansions. The clerk, a young guy named Ben, too honest to be long in public service, pulled up the most recent batch of records. There it was. A revised HOA territory overlay map, submitted just 2 weeks prior. The document was slick, glossy, and had a stamp of preliminary administrative approval. It claimed that Red Timber Creek had unanimously voted to integrate 5 new parcels for future development alignment. My parcel, Dry Hills Estate, was labeled Section B, Phase 1, Rural Inclusion. I laughed out loud. Then I asked to see the signatory file. That's where things went from stupid to felonious. The submission listed a corporate applicant, Red Timber Holdings, LLC. Never heard of them, so I looked them up. They didn't exist. No registry, no license, not even a shell account in Oklahoma's business database. But 2 of the signature lines had names I recognized. County employees. Both signatures were off. Same names, wrong pen stroke, weird loops. For anyone else, it might have passed. But not for someone who used to investigate forged tax filings and fake estate trusts for a living. I called in a favor from an old contact at the Oklahoma Tax Commission and cross-referenced archived government forms bearing the same names. The results were clear as daylight. The signatures had been lifted and traced, poorly and from a document filed back in 2019. It was textbook forgery. By the next morning, I'd assembled my first formal evidence log. Photographs of the altered stakes, high-res scans of the forged submission, matched signature comparisons, and a full summary report. I handed it off to my attorney, Ellis Worden, mid-40s, ex-military, and meaner than a hornet in a bottle when cornered. He whistled as he flipped through the binder. They're not just bluffing. This is organized. Someone's trying to legalize land theft. I nodded, and failing to do it clean. Then it's time to go on record. Ellis helped me draft and file a formal complaint with the county prosecutor's office, along with a notice of fraudulent action against the HOA and any entity claiming authority over my land. We also sent a cease and desist to Red Timber Creek, marked certified with return receipt. That evening, I got a voicemail. No caller ID, just Karen's voice. "You can ignore our notices all you want, Mr. McCormick, but the board has authority now. We're offering you a chance to settle this amicably. Don't make this harder than it needs to be." She hung up without so much as a fake goodbye. By morning, a fresh envelope arrived in the mail. Same thick paper, same faux courteous tone. Only this time it came with a neat spreadsheet calculating the unpaid obligations due to the community. Total $163,412.28. It included penalties, dues, late fees, and a bullet-pointed breakdown of shared infrastructure usage. I read the whole thing while chewing bacon in my kitchen, then passed it to Ellis, who muttered something about racketeering statutes and poured himself another cup of my coffee. I didn't sleep much that night. Not because I was scared, because now I was pissed. And I don't fight with fists. I fight with paper, evidence, and consequences. You ever get served a lawsuit before sunrise? I have now. It was 5:30 in the morning when a white Toyota with no plates crept up my drive like a thief. I'd already been up since 4. Insomnia and rage don't mix well with a quiet conscience. I was drinking my 3rd cup of black coffee, watching the frost burn off the alfalfa field, when I saw the guy toss an envelope out his window and hightail it back down the hill. I grabbed the envelope before the dew could soak it through. "Notice of civil action," it said in bold letters, addressed to Randell J. McCormick, doing business as Dry Hills Estate. By the time I finished reading, my jaw felt like it had cracked in two. Red Timber Creek HOA, the same gang of suburban pirates who forged signatures and staked false boundaries on my land, had filed suit in Payne County District Court. They weren't just asking for money. No, they were swinging for the fences. 50% of all farm revenue over the last 2 years. Mandatory retroactive HOA membership. Annual dues starting at $16,000. Immediate compliance with HOA architectural standards. And, get this, shared resource access, including full control of my private groundwater well, which they claimed was vital for neighborhood water pressure stabilization. I almost spilled my coffee from laughing so hard. The court date was set for 2 weeks out. Not a lot of time. I called Ellis. He read the complaint, let out a low whistle, and muttered, "They're filing forward. They know they forged that map, but they're using the lawsuit to muddy the waters, make it look like a dispute. This isn't a lawsuit. It's a smoke bomb. We had a choice. Delay the hearing or face it head on." I didn't want to wait. This wasn't just about principle now. This was a test. If the court even entertained their fiction, every landowner in the state was in danger. So I decided to walk into that courtroom and crush the fantasy under my boot. Ellis wanted to bring in co-counsel. I said no. I'd testify for myself. I knew the land, I knew the law, and I damn well knew how to lay out a trail of evidence with a narrative so clean it would leave paper cuts on the judge's fingers. Court day came faster than I expected. It was one of those beige mornings in Oklahoma where the clouds just sit there like a lid on a boiling pot. I wore my best jeans, my least dusty boots, and a dark gray shirt. No tie. I walked into that courthouse like I used to walk into an IRS deposition, stone-faced and loaded. Karen was already there, seated front and center with her 2 lawyers. She looked smug, like a PTA mom with a gun in her purse. Her attorney was a local shark named Wilson Mace, the type who always looked like he'd just eaten a junior associate for breakfast. He gave me a once-over, clearly disappointed I didn't show up with some 6-figure litigator in a designer suit. We sat. The clerk called the session to order, and just like that, the circus began. Karen's lawyers opened strong, at least theatrically. They referred to my farm as unregulated commercial encroachment, talked about municipal alignment, and used the phrase regional fairness zone like it was something more than a term Karen probably made up during a wine-fueled HOA meeting. Then it was my turn. I asked the judge for permission to address the court directly. He agreed. I pulled out a bound report, 120 pages, tabbed and annotated, and handed copies to the court and opposing counsel. Inside, side-by-side overlays of official property maps, dated survey logs, copies of certified deeds, high-resolution photos of the forged stake markings, and a page-by-page analysis of the fraudulent filings. Then came the clincher. "Your Honor," I said calmly, flipping to page 73, "this is a notarized affidavit from the county zoning office, stating these maps were never approved through official channels, nor were public hearings held." The signatures on their application, as you'll see in the comparison on the next tab, were lifted from a 2019 tax adjustment form and digitally altered. I paused, let that hang in the air like smoke. And this, I reached into a separate folder and held up a flash drive, contained security footage from last week. You'll see Ms. Godfrey trespassing on my land with 2 accomplices, staking flags, photographing irrigation systems, and threatening to take control of my groundwater well. None of them had legal authority to be there. None of them had my consent. Karen didn't flinch. Not at first, but her lawyer leaned in and whispered something, and I saw it. Just the slightest twitch of panic in her left eye. Then came the part no one expected. Judge Rowland didn't dismiss the case. He didn't rule in anyone's favor. Instead, he lowered his glasses and asked the bailiff to call in a representative from the district attorney's office. Given the materials submitted here today, he said, flipping through my binder, this may exceed the scope of civil proceedings. I am referring this matter to the county prosecutor for review under Title 21, forgery, conspiracy to defraud, and criminal trespass. Mr. McCormick, you'll be contacted to give a formal statement. Karen finally spoke. This is a civil matter. We were simply asserting community interests. The judge stared at her like she'd just farted in church. You submitted false documents under a fake company name, he said flatly. You are no longer in a civil court. We are discussing potential criminal conduct. This court is adjourned. Just like that, the gavel came down. Outside the courthouse, a small crowd had gathered, local landowners mostly, and a reporter from the Stillwater Tribune. I didn't speak to them. I walked straight to my truck, turned the key, and sat there for a minute with the engine idling and my knuckles white on the wheel. I wasn't celebrating, because I'd just seen the look on Karen's face when she realized her bluff got called, and someone like her, someone who'd already crossed the line, wouldn't just walk away quietly. I'd barely pulled out of the courthouse parking lot before my phone lit up with a text from Miguel, my foreman. Just 3 words. They hit us. No context. No explanation, just dread. I floored the gas and tore down Highway 51 like a man late to his own funeral. 40 minutes later, I skidded onto my gravel drive, the dust cloud trailing behind me like a tale of fury. Miguel was waiting by the barn, face tight, arms crossed. He didn't say a word, just nodded toward the lower field. That's when I saw it. The irrigation lines, the backbone of our entire winter yield, had been slashed. Not just punctured, but gutted in long, deliberate strokes. Clean cuts, almost surgical, stretching for 50 yards across the main line. Water pooled in dark patches under the morning frost, seeping uselessly into the soil. Miguel spoke low. Happened last night. We checked everything after sundown. Lines were intact. I came out at 6, and it looked like this. I nodded, jaw clenched. Security cam? Nothing down there. Motion sensor didn't trigger. Either they knew where it was, or we're dealing with someone who moves like a damn ghost. I didn't believe in ghosts, but I did believe in people with too much time and not enough morality. We walked the perimeter. That's when we noticed the stakes. Plastic survey stakes, red and white, dotted the field in a perfect grid, each marked with RTC Sector C, reserved for community greenway development. It looked like some deranged HOA art installation. Miguel kicked one over. They actually think they own this. I took pictures of every single one. By mid-afternoon, 2 of my workers reported being stopped on their way back from the supplier by a pair of men in navy windbreakers with clipboards, asking routine compliance questions for HOA alignment. One of the men, bald, with a neck tattoo. He tried to hide behind a collared shirt, flashed a laminated badge with no seal and no name. They told him to piss off. The guy took pictures of their truck and followed them for 3 miles before disappearing near County Road 18. By that evening, I'd had enough. I called Ellis and asked him to come out. We walked the property together, and I laid it all out. The sabotage, the fake inspectors, the stakes. He was quiet most of the time, taking notes, tapping into his recorder every few minutes. He wasn't a man who reacted. He was a man who filed and struck later, when it counted. This isn't bluffing anymore, he finally said. They're escalating to coercion, sabotage, maybe even intimidation. It's not just property now, it's criminal exposure. They're trying to break you. I nodded. I was IRS for 12 years. I know what coercion looks like, and I know what happens when people like Karen feel cornered. We doubled the number of cameras. Installed new infrared units on every outbuilding. Set perimeter alerts to ping my phone. I hired a local vet named Paige, former MP, to do nightly patrols in an unmarked pickup. No decals. Just a Mossberg pump in the rack and a Shepherd in the back seat. Then came the break. 4 nights later, at 2:30 in the morning, I got a motion alert on my phone. Barn entrance. The footage showed a tall figure in a hoodie and gloves pushing open the side door and slipping inside. I watched live as he crept around, holding something under his jacket. The camera in the office caught it clear. A black briefcase with HOA branding. The son of a bitch left it on my desk. I didn't call 911. I drove straight to the barn, lights off, brakes quiet. By the time I got there, the guy was gone. But the briefcase was real, and it wasn't empty. Inside was a stack of pre-filled notice of assessment forms, complete with backdated penalty amounts, forged late fees, and photocopies of payment demand letters addressed to me, all ready to be discovered during an inspection. It was bait. A planted file meant to be found by someone official, someone who didn't know better, but the idiot made one mistake. He left fingerprints. The Payne County Sheriff's Office took the briefcase that morning. They dusted it, photographed it, ran the prints through the database. 2 days later, they called me. Gregory Ronson, convicted in Kansas for document forgery and extortion, released 3 years ago. No known employment, no fixed address. But guess who posted his bail last time? Karen Godfrey. When I confronted Ellis with that little nugget, he raised an eyebrow for the first time in months. So now we've got criminal conspiracy, attempted fraud, trespassing, and obstruction of justice if they were prepping planted evidence. That's federal territory. Think the feds will take it? I asked. He looked me dead in the eye. Oh, they'll take it. Especially if we show them who's been paying for the playbook. I never thought I'd feel relief seeing a black Suburban in my driveway. But when 2 federal agents stepped out, one in a charcoal suit, the other in jeans and a windbreaker with a Department of Justice badge clipped to his belt, I knew the tide was starting to shift. They introduced themselves as Special Agent Lowry from the FBI's White Collar Crimes Division and Assistant U.S. Attorney Danielle Voss. Polite, measured, no small talk. "We've reviewed the packet your attorney sent to the state AG's office," Voss said. "Frankly, we didn't believe it at first, but then we started pulling threads." I invited them inside. We sat at the kitchen table while Miguel brewed enough coffee for a stakeout. I handed them 2 hard drives, one with footage from every camera on the property, the other with the digitized evidence logs Ellis and I had compiled over the last 6 weeks. Court records, map overlays, financial inconsistencies, audio clips, and a catalog of every forged signature we'd uncovered. Lowry nodded as he clicked through the folders. "Looks like you were running a parallel investigation before we even showed up." "Old habits," I said. "I used to be IRS CI. Money laundering, fraudulent land trusts, charity scams. You get good at spotting patterns." Voss smiled, a faint, knowing smile. "Then you're going to love this next part." She pulled out a tablet and laid it flat on the table, showing me a list of names. I recognized 5 immediately, all current or former members of the Red Timber Creek HOA board. Next to each name, financial records, flagged wire transfers, and transaction notes that didn't match their public declarations. "These people have been funneling community dues into 2 shell entities," she said. "Red Timber Holdings and Creekside Management Group. Neither has a license. Neither pays taxes, but both are receiving regular maintenance contract payments from the HOA's operating account, payments that ultimately end up in personal checking accounts." "And Karen?" I asked. Voss swiped again, a screen full of highlighted transfers. "She's the one signing most of the checks. And based on the wire paths, she's also getting a cut from every voluntary contribution collected from these so-called expansion zones." I sat back and exhaled slowly. So she wasn't just trying to shake me down, she was replicating the model. Lowry leaned forward. "Exactly. Your farm was the crown jewel. If she could strong-arm a 150-acre operation into voluntary compliance, no other homeowner in the county would stand a chance. She did this before too. Small scale, a few lots here and there. But your resistance forced her to get creative and careless." They showed me internal HOA emails recovered from a cooperating witness, a board member named Travis Hale, who'd flipped after receiving a subpoena. The emails were damning. Discussions of how to legitimize annexation through retroactive compliance policy, requests for forged signatures, spreadsheets tracking income projections from integration zones, including mine. My land was listed under the code name Harvest Phase A. Estimated yield $380,000 in projected community contributions over 3 years. Christ, I muttered, they weren't even subtle. Voss handed me a sealed envelope. You'll want to review this. We're filing federal charges within the week. Mail fraud, wire fraud, conspiracy, and unlawful coercion under Title 18. The U.S. Attorney for the Western District is taking the lead. You'll be a key witness. I opened the envelope. Inside was a subpoena in a federal witness designation form. Lowry stood up. We'll be coordinating with your local sheriff and the DA. In the meantime, we recommend caution. Don't confront her. Don't speak to anyone from the board. We've already got her phones tapped and her email flagged. We're moving fast. Fast was right. 3 days later, news broke that a federal grand jury had been convened. Local media picked it up first, then regional. By Friday, a headline on the Oklahoma Ledger read, HOA Empire under federal investigation, property owner speaks out. I hadn't spoken to any reporters, but someone had leaked my name, which made the next part inevitable. That night, I found a dead jackrabbit nailed to my front gate with a paper sign stapled to it. Farmers don't win. Paige, my night patrol, found it first. She called me, angry and shaking. I told her to bag it, photograph everything, and call the sheriff. He took one look and radioed for backup. This isn't HOA drama anymore, he said. This is criminal intimidation. We both knew it had Karen's fingerprints all over it, or one of her faithful lapdogs trying to impress her. Didn't matter. The case was already bigger than her now. Federal agents showed up the next morning with warrants and search orders. They raided the HOA office, seized servers, copied hard drives. Karen's house, the one with the ridiculous Tuscan columns and fake marble lions, got the full red tape perimeter treatment. Later that week, Lowry called. We've confirmed everything. Multiple shell companies, falsified HOA votes, backdated filings, money laundering, and, worst of all, they filed legal notices under the names of 3 deceased residents to make their unanimous approval stick. I blinked. Dead people voted her expansion through? Lowry chuckled bitterly. 3 of them, including a guy who passed in 2014. Karen submitted his signed consent last fall. I wasn't surprised. Not anymore. But I was ready. Because this wasn't just about dry hills anymore. This was war. By now, most people in Karen's shoes would have called a lawyer, signed a plea deal, and started Googling federal prison commissary limits. But not her. No, Karen Godfrey didn't retreat. She escalated. The morning after the federal raid, a surprise inspection notice showed up taped to my greenhouse door, printed on HOA letterhead. Laughable, considering the HOA was now effectively paralyzed by a court order. It cited alleged soil contamination and unregulated pesticide usage. No names, no agency seals, just an empty threat with a clipboard and a hope I'd cave. Later that afternoon, a white panel van rolled up the farm road and stopped just outside the fence. 2 men in neon vests got out and started taking pictures of the fields, the irrigation tanks, even my compost heap. When Miguel confronted them, they claimed to be from the Central Oklahoma Environmental Monitoring Board, which of course doesn't exist. I reviewed the security footage myself. No badges, no vehicle markings, and a license plate registered to a landscaping company 2 counties away, a company owned, coincidentally, by one of Karen's former board members. That same night, someone cut the feed to our central surveillance hub, clean slice through the fiber junction, out near the south field. Whoever did it knew exactly where to hit, a spot not even visible from the road. Paige and I rode the perimeter twice, rifles across our laps. We didn't see anyone, but we did find something else. Buried under a tarp near the eastern fence line was a pile of boxes marked hazardous material, keep dry. Inside, sealed bags of nitrogen fertilizer and a stack of empty glyphosate containers. My guess? They were planning to dump it and claim we'd been polluting. A setup, a damn sloppy one. Ellis took one look and said what I was already thinking. This is their Hail Mary. They know the walls are closing in, so they're trying to sabotage you before they go down. And it wasn't just threats anymore. It was psychological warfare. Every morning brought something new. Red tags posted on random gates warning of pending compliance violations. Flyers on the community bulletin board claiming I'd poisoned nearby wells. One day, Karen even filed a restraining order against me, claiming I'd threatened her, which was dropped in court within 48 hours when I produced GPS logs showing I hadn't left my property all week. Still, it kept the noise up. And for people like her, noise is power. But I wasn't the only one she was trying to crush. Word spread fast through the rural community. Turns out, I wasn't the first landowner to get a welcome letter from Karen's HOA mafia. 3 others came forward, all small holders on the edge of Red Timber Creek's ever-growing footprint. One had paid close to $10,000 in voluntary alignment fees just to avoid a lawsuit. Another had signed paperwork under duress, believing it came from the county. That's when I made the decision. I wasn't going to fight this alone anymore. I called a friend, retired news anchor, now a podcaster, with a dedicated following of angry taxpayers and legal nerds. He'd covered one of my IRS cases back in the day, a church laundering donations through fake nonprofits in Kansas. He remembered me. The next week, I appeared on his show, Rural Hostage: How One Man's Farm Exposed a Suburban Cartel. The episode went viral. Downloads passed 1 million in under 48 hours. More people started speaking up. Former HOA board assistants, landscaping contractors who'd been stiffed, a widow who'd discovered her late husband's signature on a vote he never cast. The narrative shifted fast. I was no longer just Rand McCormick's stubborn farm owner. I was a damn whistleblower, and that's when Karen made her biggest mistake yet. On a chilly Wednesday morning, 2 men in windbreakers with fake county IDs approached Miguel and tried to enter the main processing barn. He told them to leave. One of them shoved him. Miguel shoved back harder. That's when Paige appeared, stepped right between them, shotgun lowered but not aimed, and said, "Y'all have 10 seconds to get off this property before I treat you like coyotes." They ran. But the cameras caught their faces. One of them, same guy who'd trespassed into my office weeks ago, the one who planted the fake assessment forms. We handed everything to Agent Lowry. Within hours, we got a call from the U.S. Attorney's Office. "We're moving. Indictments are being prepared. Karen and multiple associates will be charged this week. If she tries anything else, you call us before the cops." By nightfall, news vans were parked at the entrance to Dry Hills. Reporters were interviewing neighbors. Satellite trucks hummed by the road. The story had blown up. Karen didn't just poke the bear. She built a bonfire and danced on it, thinking it wouldn't burn. It started with a warrant and ended with a perp walk. The morning of the raid was colder than usual. Frost crept up the windshield of my pickup as I sipped coffee and watched from the bluff overlooking my northern field. I didn't have long to wait. At exactly 7:04 a.m., the first convoy rolled into Red Timber Creek. 4 unmarked Suburbans, a county sheriff cruiser, and a federal van with a satellite dish mounted on top. By 7:10, Karen Godfrey was in handcuffs on her front porch, still wearing her silk robe and barking at agents like she was being inconvenienced by a delayed brunch. They didn't answer. They were too busy hauling out boxes of HOA financial records, electronics, and storage drives. A neighbor caught the whole thing on camera, uploaded it to TikTok with the caption, "When Karen runs the wrong kind of community." It hit 2 million views by noon. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. I'd seen too many cases die on technicalities, watched too many arrogant grifters walk free on bad procedure, but what came next left little room for doubt. Within 24 hours, the U.S. Attorney's Office announced formal indictments against 9 individuals connected to the Red Timber Creek HOA. Charges included conspiracy to commit wire fraud, forgery of government documents, use of false instruments to manipulate land records, money laundering through fictitious corporate entities, and, my personal favorite, coercion through the abuse of administrative authority. Karen herself was charged on 13 federal counts, including orchestrating a racketeering scheme under the RICO Act, normally reserved for mob bosses and crime syndicates. Apparently, she'd earned her place in that company. Ellis and I reviewed the full 83-page indictment line by line. Each section outlined how they'd expanded HOA boundaries without approval, retrofitted community development plans after the fact, and forged consent forms from both current and deceased homeowners. The financial trail was meticulous. Kickbacks disguised as service payments, dues routed to personal LLCs, even bribes to local zoning clerks, 2 of whom had already confessed. We'd caught them mid-scheme, and the scheme ran deep. Karen's right hand, Alan York, the smug treasurer with the fake MBA, flipped first. He handed over emails, passwords, even a burner phone used to communicate with subcontractors they'd hired for quiet compliance enforcement. Turns out, the fake inspectors who harassed Miguel paid in cash. Untraceable, they thought, until one of them used the same burner to text his girlfriend. I testified before the grand jury 2 days later. I brought every file, every log, every photo I'd compiled over months. When I laid out how they tried to forge entry into my property, plant evidence, and use HOA authority as a legal cudgel, one juror shook his head like he'd just watched a documentary on organized crime. When I finished, Voss, the federal prosecutor, said simply, "Thank you, Mr. McCormick. You've done more groundwork here than some of our task forces." That night, as I sat on my porch watching the wind ripple through the ryegrass, my phone buzzed. A message from Agent Lowry. Official now. HOA dissolved by judicial order. Assets frozen. Karen denied bail. It was surreal. The same woman who had stormed onto my land, declared dominion over my well, and demanded half my profits, now sat in federal lockup awaiting trial, but it wasn't over. Because after the headlines faded and the cameras moved on, the real damage remained. 3 other families came forward to file civil suits against what remained of the HOA board. One elderly couple had paid nearly $25,000 in integration dues under threat of legal action. A young family had been denied use of their own driveway after refusing to sign HOA documents. All of them used my case as precedent. The community began to change too. Red Timber Creek, once a shiny example of organized suburbia, was now under county review. Residents voted to dissolve the entire structure. The HOA office was shut down. The ornamental gate was removed. They even pulled up the ridiculous HOA-branded flags that line the streets. But the biggest surprise came from the courtroom. Judge Rowland, the same one who had referred the case originally, approved a compensation settlement of $1.8 million in damages to me for lost revenue, legal fees, property damage, and what he called reputational sabotage. I stared at the number for a long time when Ellis handed me the paperwork. It wasn't about the money, not really, but it meant one thing clear as daylight. They'd lost. Every scheme, every fake map, every midnight intrusion shattered. Their empire of paper and lies had collapsed under the weight of one thing they didn't count on, a farmer who knew how to fight with facts. I mounted the new sign myself. 3/4-inch steel plate, powder-coated black, with lettering laser cut deep enough to read from the road. It stood at the head of the drive, bolted to a post sunk 4 feet in concrete. No trespassing. This is not an HOA. This is private land. Step on the grass. Face charges. Some folks might have called it overkill, but after everything we'd been through, the lies, the threats, the sabotage, the lawsuits, I didn't care what they called it. I'd earned the right to make my boundaries clear. Dry Hills Estate was still standing, and so was I. The story didn't end with Karen's arrest. In fact, that's when things really started to change. For me, and for a lot of people who'd been too scared or too isolated to speak up before. The day after the court's final ruling, I got a letter in the mail, handwritten, neat cursive. Dear Mr. McCormick, we live 3 lots over from Red Timber Creek. My husband and I almost signed the integration paperwork 2 years ago. We thought it was mandatory. You saved us. Thank you. Anne and Robert L. It was the first of dozens. Letters, emails, DMS. People I'd never met thanking me for standing up. Some asked for advice. Some sent pies. One guy shipped me a box of cartridges with a sticky note that just read, "Just in case they try again." I kept every letter in a binder labeled "The Real Neighbors." That, more than the court ruling or the settlement check, reminded me what all this was really about. It wasn't just about me, or even my farm. It was about what happens when regular people push back against a system built to exhaust them into silence. Karen's trial moved quickly. Her defense team tried every trick in the book. Mental strain, financial confusion, claims of mismanagement, even one laughable suggestion that the board members misinterpreted their governing authority due to overly technical zoning language. None of it stuck. Not when the prosecution had bank records, emails, video, and, me. I testified again, this time not in anger, just with clarity. 12 jurors, 3 hours of deliberation, unanimous, guilty on all counts. Karen Godfrey was sentenced to 12 years in federal prison, with no parole before 9. 8 of her co-conspirators received between 4 and 9 years each, depending on cooperation. Several former Red Timber Creek residents are now suing her estate civilly, and they'll win. The HOA itself is defunct, disbanded by court order, and stripped of all assets. The fake companies? Liquidated. The fraudulent filings? Expunged and replaced with real maps, real lines, real truth. Me? I took some of that settlement money and built a new greenhouse, expanded my heirloom tomato operation, hired 3 more full-time workers, and finally gave Miguel that company truck he'd been too proud to ask for. But I didn't stop there. I started sharing my story, not just in courtrooms, but on podcasts, ag expos, and legal workshops. Landowners from Texas, Georgia, even California started reaching out. People dealing with similar HOA overreach, fraudulent assessments, illegal annexations. I gave them everything I had: templates, case files, maps, strategy. I even worked with a local nonprofit to create a legal support network called Free Soil Project, dedicated to defending rural and private landowners from exactly this kind of abuse. It started with 1 county. Now it's in 5 states and growing. And still, every morning I walk my land. The wind moves over the hills like it always has. The orchard's growing strong. The new irrigation system purrs like a cat on caffeine. And I know one thing with total certainty. No one's going to steal this place again. Not with maps, not with fake votes, not with threats. This land has roots. So do I.